Hey adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. So this is the fourth book in the Harry Potter series. I have previously read this book. I have not reviewed it, and so I'm going through and reviewing all these books as I go through them. I don't have a ton of brand new or fascinating thoughts on this one like I have on, well, like I thought I had on book 2, but let's continue through and see what I have to say here. So this is fantasy, of course, low fantasy, a little bit. It's kind of like a mixture between low fantasy because it is set in our world, but also portal fantasy because you are taken, you go through, you go through the wall, platform 9 3/4, and go on the train, and you arrive at this fantasy magical island or magical castle, and that's kind of how this, why people consider it portal fantasy as well. But low fantasy, portal fantasy, it's kind of both. It's a little bit of an adventure. This one incorporates some games into it, which is actually a trope that I really enjoy. Before I continue on with this review, though, I'd just quickly like to say if you're liking what you're seeing from an Erudite adventure, please like, comment, and subscribe. Alright, so Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is the fourth book in the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling, and considered by many to be their favorite. This is one of the books that, and movies even, that you ask a lot of people and they'll say, oh, book 4 is my favorite. And that's great. I'm glad that that's the case for people. It's not for me, as far as I can tell. We will see once I continue through books 5, 6, and 7 and get to the end of those. The fourth movie, though, has never been my favorite, and neither was the fourth book on my original read through. Upon this reread, however, I found I enjoyed it quite a bit, but this is one of the only books where I think that the movies did something better than the books. And that's kind of rare for books or movies. Sometimes you'll get movies or adaptations that do something a little bit better than it was in the book, and it's just usually one aspect of it. And that's actually what it is with this one as well. There's just one aspect that I thought the movies did significantly better. One change that they made, and I'll talk about that when I get there. So occasionally with these reviews, I've had something to add to the conversation, or I feel like I've had something to add to the conversation. Some thoughts of my own that I find interesting or that I am discovering for the first time. With this one, I don't have much to say that hasn't already been said. I enjoyed this book. That's really the simple overall of this review is I enjoyed this book. But it didn't move around much in my ranking from the first time that I read these books, and at that point it was kind of sitting about place 4. Of course it's book 4, but it's also about place 4 in the series for me, and that's, I don't know if I think that it is still sitting there in about place 4 based on my memory of the last 3 books, but also my reread of the first 4 books now. I think it's still sitting about that place 4 for me. I don't know if I enjoyed it more than book 3 or less than book 3. I really liked book 3 on reread better than I liked it the first time I read it or any of the times that I've ever watched the movies. I don't feel like the movie 3 is as good as people give it credit for. But it is right about the same level as book 3 for me. So somewhere in there. I do have a huge love and draw to anything that is like training or task related, or in this instance, games. And so the whole Triwizard Tournament for me is just so much fun in that aspect. I just really end up enjoying that aspect of the story because it's exactly the type of thing that I end up loving. I also feel like this is the first book where we are really truly seeing the stakes come into play. Of course, that's more towards the end of the book, but it also, throughout this whole book, we're seeing things are not quite what they seem. Things are a little bit more scary, a little bit more dark, more dangerous, especially with the World Quidditch Cup at the beginning of the game, and then, or at the beginning of the book, and how all that plays out, and then what happens at the end of the book. It's kind of, there's this center part of the book is just fun and games, and this Triwizard Tournament that's so much interesting, but it's also bookended by very dark, very scary aspect of this world. Book 3 kind of started that, but and I was surprised when I read book 3. I was surprised at how much of that I was seeing, and how much it actually did start out with that and start raising the stakes a little bit. But then book 4 is where we really dig into it in book 4, and then from here on out it just gets bigger and bigger until the end of the series. We are introduced to some new characters, and there are some genuinely lovely moments in this book, as well as some rather heartbreaking ones, and I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about there. Harry can be a rather manipulative character, which is something fascinating about him, because so often he's a character that people view as an everyman, meaning he's a self-insert for the reader. The reader can go and read this book and put themselves in Harry's shoes and pretend they're Harry while they're reading this book, and so they can enjoy those adventures. And that's not exactly the case. It is a little bit, to some degree, absolutely, but at the same time you find these interesting characteristics, like this manipulativeness of Harry, that a lot of people don't have. Some people do, but a lot of people don't. There's some unexplained things, like how Fred and George know everything, and it's kind of fitting with their character, but it's also kind of fitting with the style of story, the very soft magic that they play with in this, and all that kind of stuff. Upon my first read, I totally missed some of the setup and foreshadowing for some of the characters, and it comes back when you read it again, knowing the future of these things. You can see it a little bit better, and it makes a little bit more sense. So that is a good thing. I'm pleased to say that I can find that, and that Rowling is a better writer than I thought the first time through these books, essentially. Rita Skeeter is one, but also specifically Bill and Fleur, their relationship and all that kind of stuff, that always felt like it came out of nowhere to me, especially in the movies, because I mean the movies have to leave out so much. There's so much in these books that the movies have to cut and had to cut in order to tell the story. In general, I think the movies do a good job at adapting these books, but there's so much more in the books, and the first time I read it, I didn't see some of these foreshadowing, some of the stuff that was going on with this, and upon this reread, I was able to catch a lot of that. There are some questions that I don't think ever get answered, and you have to think yourself in circles to really come up with a reasonable explanation as to how they work. But if you just read the story for the story, it is really enjoyable. You can, if you don't think too hard about some of these plot holes or some of these things that you've heard other people talk about, and you just read the story for what it is, it's very enjoyable. The thing that I feel like the movies does better in this one is, it's an interesting one because it's such a little thing, and in some ways the book is better about it, and in other ways the movie, it adds character development in the movies in a way that the books don't do. Within the Wizarding world, the fact that Dobby gives Harry the gillyweed actually works really well. It makes sense within the Wizarding world. It makes enough sense in the books. However, in the movies, they have Neville give it to Harry. And I feel like that just really fits his character so well, the character of Neville, so well as the themes of this book and of Gryffindor House and all. And I really like that decision in the movies to have Neville give Harry the gillyweed. I feel like, and of course all the surrounding stuff, all the setup for that moment and how that happens has to be changed a little bit, but I feel like it works so well in the movies in a way that it doesn't quite work nearly as well in the book for me as a reader. It works in the books, but I feel like it's better. It's just a better choice to have Neville do it. That's my opinion, but I actually think that the movies do that better. As for a few final thoughts, though, we get a real villain monologue here, which is kind of funny, and Voldemort is kind of a little bit of a joke within the Dark Lord circles, but it is fun just to hear him do his villain monologue, and it is like it's intense, it's villainous, and it's a very good villain monologue. I knew it was coming, I just had not put it into those terms until this read, that it was a villain monologue, and it kind of made me chuckle a bit. Also, I found that the end of term speech really hits hard in this book. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the ability that Rowling I appreciate this ability in any author, but especially here, I appreciate the ability that Rowling has to invoke emotion from the readers in a way that sometimes you don't get. And so just that end of term speech and what it means, and the reaction that I as a reader have to it, knowing the story, knowing what happened, but then also seeing the reaction of the students to it and knowing the reactions that come forth from it into book 5 and book 6. It's so good. It's just a really good fine end of term speech. I still don't love the narration of the audiobooks, but it does get better, and I get more used to it with each book that I listen to, and so it's kind of like, it's not great, but I'm also used to it now, so I'm just going to continue doing it. Plus, I'm listening to them on audiobook because that's significantly better for me than trying to read all of these with all of the many other books that I have to read. And so I'm enjoying having audiobooks to listen to for them. They're not the best audiobooks in my opinion. This really is a special series though, and I understand why people who grew up with it have so much nostalgia tied to it. I didn't grow up with it, and I think I'm actually very blessed in that way because I can read the stories and appreciate the stories for what they are, not for the nostalgia of them. And I do have a little bit of nostalgia tied to them, even though it's only been since 2019, I think, since I started reading the series and watched the movies for the first time, stuff like that. So it's not, I haven't been reading these for that long, but I have enjoyed them, and I think that's really cool. I think that the fact that I can appreciate these stories in a different light than most other readers can is really cool for me. So anyways, that is my review for Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.